Thanks for everybody for being here, and I thank Dr. Reich for bringing her students and for sharing an introduction to our guest speaker today. And I'm going to go pull up your maps, which Michael highly approved of, and your PowerPoint.
Well, thank you. I want to start by saying it just brings me profound pleasure to introduce our guest today, Mr. Cooch. He is a 2008 graduate of Chestnut Hill College, so this is a homecoming. It's not the first time he's been an invited speaker. He was the graduation speaker for his own graduation. I might add, he was a political science major here at Chestnut Hill College, and so he took several of my courses and was one of my advisees here at the college. So he's just a terrific student. And now you can see why I'm so excited that he is here with us today. After graduation from Chestnut Hill, Michael went on to earn a master's degree in international peace and conflict resolution at Arcadia University. And he's currently accepted into, but has deferred a year, the Penn University of Pennsylvania Leadership Master's Program. Michael is actually in Philadelphia now, but after he got his master's at Arcadia, he returned to his home country of Sudan. But Sudan was no longer Sudan. It was South Sudan. South Sudan had broken away in a civil war and became a newly independent country in 2011. And when he came back to the new country of South Sudan, he was invited to work for the then newly formed government in the office of the president as a senior analyst. He has led research projects and conferences in his field. He's been featured in a movie and in a novel, which I don't know if you guys can hold it up, see it in my screen. How Fast Can You Run? So it's a biography of Michael's life based on his younger life in Sudan, and then Kenya, and then Philadelphia. Michael became a US citizen in 2009. And just recently, he was asked to again return to South Sudan to help the leadership there. So we've engaged him for this talk here just in time. So please welcome our guest, Mr. Michael Cooch.
Well, thank you. I want to start by thanking you, Professor Wright, for that nice introduction. I also want to thank Professor McCarthy for inviting me, and for you as the Dean of Schools to also approve of my invitation to interact with your class or with the students this afternoon. I'm going to start, and really it's a homecoming, as you said. And believe it or not, Professor Reich, I'm in the class you taught me in, room 14 in Fournier Hall. And just being here, I was telling Professor McCarthy that this brings a lot of memories because I spent a lot of time here. This is where I took most of the classes that you taught me and others in the political science department. So I feel at home. I feel that it just reminds me of the time I spent here. And it is nice to be back in room 14. Before I begin, I just wanted to thank both of you for inviting me. And it's wonderful to be able to see both you, Professor Wright, via this forum, and to see Professor McCarthy today in person after a very, very long time. It's been about 12 years since I was here, since I saw both of you. So I'm glad to be able to see you today. It's different. The campus is very quiet here. I met Walter, who I knew many years ago. He was the only person, and then Professor McCarthy today. Before I begin, I want to briefly give you the background of the brief history of Sudan and South Sudan. I know we were not able to see the map, but the map that okay. If I can have the map that there's a map that you had in your introduction, Professor Wright, about the splitting of the then Sudan into two countries, which you mentioned. So it's a green map, and in that map, basically, you have what was then the Sudan, splitting into two countries in 2011, and South Sudan gained independence in July 9th, 2011 from Sudan. Before that, Sudan was the biggest country in Africa. And after a long civil war, that was the longest civil war in Africa as well, that started in 1983, a peace agreement was signed, comprehensive peace agreement was signed in 2005 between the Sudanese rebels movement, known as the Sudanese People Liberation Movement / Army. Sudanese People Liberation Army is both a political movement as well as a rebel movement, a rebel army. And so after a long civil war between 1983 to 2005, that the comprehensive peace agreement was signed, and in that peace agreement, it was agreed that after 6 years of interim period, the South Sudanese will vote in a referendum, and in that recipe, they will decide either to become to remain part of the old Sudan, or if they voted for separation to have their own independent country. In that referendum, the South Sudanese voted overwhelmingly for separation, and that is how South Sudan was born as the newest country. So they voted 98% for separation, to have South Sudan separated from Sudan. Right after that, of course, independence came about, and what was then the former rebel movement / army had to quickly organize for this new nation state. That means the rebels from the SPLA and SPLA had to, from the scratch, build institutional government. Namely, first and foremost, they had to come out with a constitution, the transitional constitution, because they knew from the beginning that they had to put together a permanent constitution, but they needed a transitional constitution, which was then drafted, and through that constitution now we have to come up with the type of government that was deemed appropriate for South Sudan. So they came up with sort of a federal government with 3 branches of government, as similarly to what we have in the United States. So we have the executive branch, the judiciary, and the legislature. Also, stemming from the drafting of the Constitution, you now have to have all the branches, all the institutions that were required to run the government. So you have the ministry set up, you have commission, and all you can imagine that was required of this new government. In 2000, so you are talking now from 2011 onward. Unfortunately, in 2013, the country slipped back into civil war. So we got independence completely from Sudan. So we have a new president, we have new currency, we are now building our roads because we had the longest civil war, and these things are not in place. Before we could really lay the foundation for the new state, we had old grudges that were unresolved during the years of civil war, and some of which had to be resolved, but were not. One of them, during the civil war, there were tribal clashes within the political movement. There were differences in the leadership And the leader who spearheaded the whole independence movement or revolution, Dr. John Garang, had just died in 2005, right after the peace agreement. So based on the military ranks, you had the second, whoever was second in command, actually the current president was second in command, Salva Kiir Mayardit, had to assume power immediately after the leader perished in a plane crash in 2005. And then the third in line is Dr. Riek Machar had to assume the position of the vice president. And as the country was embarking on establishing sort of reconstruction efforts after the referendum on independence, the two men disagreed on how we run this new country forward. Disagreement arose from either curbing corruption, to nepotism, to discrimination, tribalism, and so many other problems that the two men disagreed on the vision of the country. As a result, the president fired the vice president, and it was thereafter that the vice president went and mobilized his tribesmen. I know this doesn't sound, this is not how it works in the Western world, but easily just having the vice president fired, the backfired on the system. The civil war just started right after that, and you had sort of a very nasty civil war that started from the capital to and to other towns in South Sudan. That was between 2013 and in 2015. In 2015, the peace agreement was signed, and the peace agreement really was not only meant to sort of bring about a solution or a resolution of the conflict, but to really look on how the issue of state formation. So how do you, things that were not discussed right after independence, the South Sudanese were ready to have their own country, but there was no time to imagine what this new country would look like. So in that peace agreement, it was an opportunity to sort of revitalize or to reconstruct or reimagine what South Sudan could look like. And I just wanted to share with you a preamble of the peace agreement that was signed in 2015. So I don't know if you are able to see it, but I wanted to just have you look at or to read what the preamble is saying, and you can sort of see from it what was intended after the agreement and what actually led to the conflict itself. And I'll read it to you. So once they signed the peace agreement, the parties to the conflict, in this case, the government was really divided into two. The one tribe, the biggest tribe was the president, which is the Dinka tribe, and the second biggest tribe is the Nuer tribe, which is the vice president. And so the warring parties, once they signed that agreement, which was signed, actually was brokered by the African Union with the friends of South Sudan, such as Troika, United States, Norway, and the United Kingdom, as well as other regional bodies in the East Africa, such as the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, where South Sudan is a member. So they brokered this agreement, and the preamble I will read to you say, mindful of our commitment under the transitional constitution of the Republic of South Sudan. Remember I talked about the transitional constitution. Therefore, it means we do not have a permanent constitution, or we still do not have a permanent constitution yet. As amended, to lay the foundation of a united, peaceful, and prosperous society based on justice, equality, respect for human rights, and the rule of law. And it's funny we mentioned rule of law. Professor Wright taught me a class called rule of law. Deeply regretting the scale of untold human suffering that has befallen our country and people as a result of disregarding this commitment. Determined to compensate our people by recommitting ourselves to peace and constitutionalism and not to repeat mistakes of the past. Recognizing the prime recognizing the primacy significance of preserving the sovereignty and territorial integrity of our country. Cognizant that the federal system of government is the popular demand of the people of the Republic of South Sudan, and the need for the RTGO stands for Revitalized Transitional Government of National Unity. That is what RTGO is. To reflect this demand by way of devolution of more powers and resources to the lower levels of government. Pursuant to the decision of the IGAD, that is the Intergovernmental Authority for Development, Assembly Head of States and Government, at its 31st Extraordinary Summit of 2017. Held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, which decided to urgently convene a high-level revitalization forum of the parties to the agreement on the resolution of the conflict in the Republic of South Sudan, including exchange groups. This is very interesting because there were those who did not join the peace agreement. They call them the exchange group to discuss concrete measures to restore permanent ceasefire, full implementation of the RC, and develop revised realistic timelines and implementation schedule towards democratic elections and the end of transitional period. I just want to stop there. So the agreement was signed basically to one thing, to resolve the conflict that had started in 2013, and second, to sort of reimagine what South Sudan will look like. And as we speak, the country is now at the phase of implementing that agreement, though not everything has been implemented as in a timely fashion as was imagined. There is generally cessation of hostilities. There is no an active civil war at the moment, though we do have challenges that were brought about by the economic cost of war. We have also, crises such as COVID, we have flooding, but all in all, the government is currently working hard, the warring faction, to implement the agreement, and at the end of the agreement, there will be an election. This will be the first election in South Sudan, where the South Sudanese will vote for the first time for the president and for the government, really for other branches of government. So that's where we are as far as the current situation in South Sudan. But I wanted to talk briefly about why I was invited. And in the agreement, there's a chapter dedicated to the topic that I was invited to speak on by Professor McCarthy, and this was to do with justice, peace and justice. And I wanted to sort of give you a sort of a continuum, which before we talk about justice and accountability and peace, there has to be, in the first place, either conflict, violent conflict, or civil war, which in this case we've had in South Sudan, either the first civil war, which started in 1983 to 2005, and then the second civil war, which I have just gone through, which started in 2013, 2 years after independence, until 2016, when the peace was revitalized. Clearly, in the case of the Backbend Sudan, there were old wounds, where the civil war took 2 decades, and we had a president that was in charge of Sudan before they split into 2 countries, called Omar al-Bashir. Omar Hassan al-Bashir was a dictator. He was one of the longest dictators in Africa. He was finally ousted in last year. And, okay, why am I saying last year? This year. So the last year, because he was in power for 30 years, from 1989 to 2019. And because of al-Bashir and the dictatorial tendencies, Sudan was changed for worse. You have the conflict in Darfur, in Eastern Sudan, and then you have the conflict in South Sudan. So there were clearly human rights violations, and you had about 2.5 million people killed in that conflict. As I said, it was the longest conflict in Africa, just alone in South Sudan, where I'm from. And what happened was the South Sudanese sort of, I don't want to say they gave up justice and accountability, but the independence of South Sudan was sort of the bargaining chip, if you will. So the Bashir granted South Sudan independence, and issues to do with justice, accountability were not addressed. And so in this case, we are not talking, I'm going to talk about these issues not as it pertains to Sudan and South Sudan, though there are things that were not solved. And if I had the map, or the other map that was up there, the map where South Sudan, yeah. So this map that I was showing you earlier, you have that area that is in the gridded sort of the triangle, the region of Abyei. It's a disputed territory. It's actually oil rich, one of the richest oil places in oil in the sort of the border between north and south. And that led to a court case in 2012. Both the Sudanese, the Sudan and South Sudan, appeared at the International Court of Justice, and the case was actually won by South Sudan, but it was never allowed to join South Sudan. And so that has not been solved. Now, as far as the conflict in South Sudan, which started in 2013, in the agreement, there's a chapter dedicated to justice, to issues to do with peace, justice, reconciliation, healing, and forgiveness. And clearly, there were violations in the last conflict, or what I call the Second Civil War. I was there myself, and what you had was a total breakdown of the new nation state, where you had about 400,000 people killed from both sides. A lot of the people that were killed were innocent civilians. And so in the agreement, they decided that we will establish an hybrid court called the Hybrid Court of South Sudan. Instead of having the perpetrators taken to the ICC or Hague, as was the case in Rwanda or in Yugoslavia and other places, the African Union and the regional bodies are really long-standing believe that African problems require African solutions, and so they do not see a need for the South Sudanese leaders to be tried in The Hague, and therefore they decided that they will establish an hybrid court that will be comprised of South Sudanese, regional African judges as well as international judges, and have these people be tried at home. So that is supposed, and then clearly it's part of the agreement again, that those leaders or generals that are directly complicit or directly involved in the killing of the people will have to be tried, and if they are found guilty, obviously they are not supposed to run in the election, and they can be tried. And then you have issues to do with reconciliation. The agreement talks about how there was a need to reconcile the communities, because the political disagreement ended up becoming a tribal conflict, and so there was a need to reconcile the communities and to heal the communities. And the government came up, which was actually also spelled in the agreement in Chapter 5, the South Sudan National Dialogue. And in this dialogue, you have sort of the eminent personalities or prominent personalities in South Sudan who are tasked to reconcile the community. Other than the Hybrid Court of South Sudan, under the accountability and justice, there was a proposal also, it's not in the agreement, but the leaders have to come up with sort of traditional mechanisms on how you resolve conflict. And there are models that have been tried in Africa. In places like Rwanda, you have a court called the Chacha Court. You have also a model of South Africa. And of those two, South Sudan also has its own that have been practiced for hundreds of years. And it's where you have the elders of the traditional leaders, who you could call traditional lawyers, in fact, not based on how it's done in the West, but there are compensation. They call it blood compensation. And you have people similar to the Chacha Court, where you have the victims and the perpetrators engaged in sort of a dialogue, or in forgiveness and in healing, and including compensating those who have been wronged. So you have, during the conflict, you had a lot of people flee to the neighboring countries where they became refugees. Others were also became an internal displaced person. They did not necessarily leave the country, but they had to resettle to different parts of South Sudan, and so they become IDPs. These people will have to be also resettled. That is the Istanbul Agreement. They will have to be resettled to their home areas and compensated. So those are, as far as when you talk about peace and justice, you have to address those things. And there is an issue to do with the economic situation of the country, which is not related to this, but this is also part of the problem, because how do you resettle all these people when the country is affected economically? You also have the issue to do with Corona. So these things are not moving as fast as you'd have to see them. But that's about the justice and peace, things to do with accountability, reconciliation, and as far as the courts. I want to talk now briefly about my personal experience, and as was alluded to by Professor Wright, how do I get involved in South Sudan, or how involved am I with, currently? So as Professor Wright had mentioned in the introduction, I joined the government of South Sudan in 2011. In fact, it was the year of independence, because I went to school here from 2000 to 2010 in Philadelphia, and then went back in 2010 right after I graduated from Acadia. So I was here for 10 years. I was going to school here, and then I just left. And right away I joined. So basically I joined the year of independence. And while there, my job was to sort of get a advisorial, where I was mostly tasked to become an analyst. I was trained, obviously, to do analysis in the office of the president, to write reports. And in some of these reports, I had the privilege, the opportunity, based on research, and we had experts and consultants that were helping this new country, that will work with us, the government will hire them, that actually trained me on how to do some of these interesting work. And in the reports, my job would be to report things as they were, at the same time be able to give recommendations, comments, and this would go to the leadership. And of course, I had line managers between me and the president, but my job was to write some of these reports or become part of the committee, including the committee on the agreement that I was just sharing with you. Yes, there were a lot of challenges becoming part of this new nation state, but there was also euphoria, especially for me, just being happy to be able to go back and have a country that I can claim to be a citizen of. So everybody was committed right after the independence to try to see this country becoming a promising nation state in the future. And though some of us, myself included, did not have much input as far as how decisions were made, and then that's how I was involved. Of course, there were a lot of shortcomings as far as taking the country towards development. But as I started earlier in my introduction, as we speak today, South Sudan, I think the worst days are behind. Everybody's sort of tired of war because the second civil war, the first civil war was the longest. Nobody saw, myself included, that we were going to go back to war by ourselves. And once we have this second civil war, the general feeling now is that everybody is tired, and the parties to the conflict, the parties to the agreement, are now being pushed, either by external actors, to make sure the agreement is implemented and that South Sudan holds its election as scheduled in 2022. And from there, I think we will see where South Sudan goes after that. I think I want to leave you time to be able to ask questions so that we can interact. So I'm not going to bore you by giving you too many explanation about things. But at this point, I want to leave you time for questions.
Great, and I will monitor. If anyone wants to write a question in the chat, I'll also monitor the chat. And you're also welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions or make comments.
Yes, so Michael, such a great presentation. Thank you so much. And I want to also thank you for the advertisement for my rule of law class. I'll be teaching that next year. So hopefully maybe a few of the students with us today will think about taking it. I wanted to follow up on the points you were making about the Commission for Truth, Reconciliation, and Healing, and how South Sudan thought that that was so important to do, given all of the long, all of the conflict and clearly people feeling very angry about violence that had been, had happened to them or their families, and the country realizing it had to move beyond this somehow. And you're right, it's a great African tradition to set up these truth and reconciliation panels to try to bring healing so that the country can come together. And I'm wondering if you think, because you're a citizen of the United States, and you're familiar with what's going on now, and the United States is having such a difficult time where we're in such disagreement, our citizenry, especially over racial issues and political issues, Republicans versus Democrats. Wondering if a truth and reconciliation approach might work in our country to try to get at some of these long festering areas of disagreement. What would you say?
That is a very interesting question, Dr. First and foremost, it is very interesting what is really happening now with regards to the social justice issues in the United States. What I believe is you have the right setup. So the way your system is set up, I've heard people make a comment that, you have elements sort of emerging, sort of non-state actors that never existed in the United States. So the militias, these people are instigating sort of what people are saying is a civil war. It's not handling well. And I think there's some truth to that. Because I remember Charles Hill, and you could see people with weapons in Michigan, what they have just started in Michigan recently with regard to the governor allegedly being targeted for kidnapping and things like that, with again some sort of militia. So I think there's a need for some sort of intervention. I'm not sure if Truth and Reconciliation Commission, sort of what we have, and I only think of that after most of the time they are set up in the aftermath, right? So you have to have sort of a violent conflict like we had in Rwanda, and genocide in South Africa with the maybe I can compare it to the situation in South Africa, because if you let these sort of non-state elements that are emerging or are becoming part of your political arrangement in the United States, then you need some sort of intervention, and it could be through what the FBI is doing, disrupting them, or sort of a dialogue of that. And I just don't have the answer to how you do the dialogue. I think what some of the leaders are doing by calling out those elements and by telling them to tone it down and not increase the division among the United States, among the American people. I think it's what I would suggest. The leaders have to be very proactive in calling them out and condemning them and discouraging this sort of militia. Because how do you go to a civil war? I think when we talk about conflict, before you could come up with solution to the conflict, you want to send it down at the grassroots. You want to avoid it. You want to start them at the root cause level. So as you have these different, this could be militia. That's what we have now. We have this in Africa. I don't imagine this becoming a serious problem in the United States, but we have to be very careful to stop them out from the beginning.
Thanks.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Very nice presentation. I appreciate all the info that you shared. So just basically a follow-up of the question that was just asked. So you believe that basically in order for change to take place in our country based off the experiences you had in Sudan, you feel as though we need to get to basically taking more accountability and getting towards the root of the problems that we have here, instead of just trying to just basically we feel like our leaders need to take more command and taking accountability of what is actually transpiring in our country, instead of just trying to defend and deflect.
Yeah, so I think that's precisely what I was saying. I think with regards to what is happening with racial injustice in the U.S., that needs to be addressed. One, the militia people, the militia groups, and their names have been mentioned, the KKK, the Proud Boys. I think there's another group called the Wolverines in the case of Michigan. These people have to be, I think they need to address them before they can gain momentum. The other thing is, and this is what I learned when I was going to at college, I see that there are social inequality. There has to be reforms with how you deal with different people, particularly how police deal with black people in the United States. Because if you remember how this became a big whole process and everything, it's been happening a while on here, and I never see it in the United States. So how that became about, you have issues with the issues of justice reform. I think you need to also deal with systemic racism and just social inequality, so the income issues, the crimes, and things like that. Things that I feel like, having been in the United States for a while, I just know they have to be addressed at some point before we get where we are. And since I came, though they did not affect me directly, since I went high school here all the way to college, you could see there were glares of some of these problems. And then maybe from Africa, I think I encountered some of these injustices, pattern in some way. Though they did not directly affect me, they did not directly affect me when I was here. These things have to be addressed from the societal point of view.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
Michael, I want to ask a question. It's fascinating to me that you were in this moment and still are about to go back to this moment where you have this fundamental question that you asked, how do you make a government? And it's just an awesome moment really to be in, as much as Sudan has struggled. I really appreciate how you are able to ask that question in a very fundamental way, and also see all of the complexities of that. Would you speak a little bit more about that? Like, what do you see as fundamental to answering that question? How do you make a government?
Yes, and this is I guess, in the case of South Sudan, we are like in a way because we are the newest country in the world. The last newest country was, I believe it was either Eritrea or Yugoslavia. Eritrea 91, I believe it was Yugoslavia. And so we are like in the sense that we do not have to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from our neighbors and our friends. And, how do you establish a nation state? And so in one sense, we are lucky that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But at the same time, I feel like what is the most challenging thing to starting a nation state is, having sat in this class for many years when I was going to school here, this is one of the topics we talk about. How the United States become a country on better rights. Actually, had me do an extra study where I had to go to the Constitution Center downtown. And we had to learn about the founding fathers, how the United States Constitution was drafted, and how it was implemented. And as a result, we came up, America is the oldest democracy in the world. And I get to appreciate, having grown up in the United States, learning how this great country was founded, and then having my newest country, that I have to think, by all accounts, I cannot imagine South Sudan becoming the United States. But these are some of the things while I'm there, I have to imagine how did US become a nation state, and I refer back to the sort of the classes that I took here at PhD, and being lucky to be in Philadelphia where the Declaration of Independence. So, two things are, Professor Wright, Professor McCarthy, I think to have to sort of establish a nation state, there are two things that come to mind in my experience being in South Sudan. I think there's the need to have a charismatic leader. Charismatic leader because you have to unite the people. Especially coming from a deeply divided society like South Sudan that you have decades of civil war. So we have a charismatic leader in Dr. John Garang Medio, who actually was educated in the United States. Got a PhD in 1981 from Iowa State and went back and established these SPLM from 1983. And it just happened that he died, and a lot of people have said he died with a vision of what South Sudan was going to be like. He basically ran the movement for 22 years. And right after they signed the peace agreement in 2005, he mysteriously crashed in a plane, and so then you have his number two come up, who is not as charismatic as John Brown. So I think you need the right leader to sort of mobilize. You need a charismatic leader to mobilize the people, and so you have a vision in that sense. The other thing is, and this is another something that we have a very, I don't know how to put this, our population do not demand their rights. They are used to not having a country, and actually are used to not challenging the system, the status quo. The reason I bring in the people is usually the rules and the rulers, right? To really imagine what this country is, it goes back to my class with Dr. Wright, and we watched, we watched a video about England, the kingdom, the United Kingdom. And so the issue to do with the rules and the rulers, there has to be a social contract. Unfortunately, in the case of South Sudan, our citizens do not even know their rights, because for many years they have had no rights. So for once they have a country and they're silencing guns, they are not challenging their rights. And I think that, I don't know how to better put it, you need both a sort of a sensitized populace of citizenry, and you also need charismatic leaders, and leaders that are actually there to take the country sort of in the promised land. So I always bring it down to not how do you construct a government, but in our case, the lack thereof right now, sort of a nation. Some people are saying that this civil war made South Sudan to become a failed state. So I would agree that South Sudan is not a failed state, but rather we came from a failed country, which is Sudan. And because of that, it's going to take time for South Sudan to be able to sort of develop. But I would say the rules and the rulers have to sort of hold each other accountable. And I think the problem with South Sudan really is the failure of governance and leadership. And then we have also the issues of the real estate. We have to put institutions. I think we have weak institutions, understandably, because we have just established these institutions of government, and they all have to work, right? It's sort of a system. And again, what a better time to really, for me, understand how the institution of government work in the United States right now, just saying how America is, where America is, and what the institutions are doing.
Thank you. That is a fascinating point to me about the people needing to be ready to, like the seed has to be there, that they can imagine, take that leap and imagine themselves as being a citizen, as you say. Are there other questions? Michael, I have one more question for you, and I'm going to just throw it out there. It's not something that we've talked about before. I know that a number of African countries have been led by women, and women have played a really big role in helping on the grassroots level to begin to educate each other and build and form that citizenry, as you say. Do you see that as women? What's the role of women in South Sudan?
Yeah, that's a good question. Traditionally, in the sort of traditional society of South Sudan, again, before we have South Sudan, we've been known to, each tribe has been known to lead their own villages, and there are traditional ways of leadership. And unfortunately, in the case of South Sudan, there are in all various tribes, and I can't think of any single tribe, it's a traditional way of running their affairs, was always a male-dominated sort of hierarchy. So women, in that sense, were sort of disregarded in leadership. Now, when we got our independence, not even before, even way before independence, Dr. John Garang, and I think having gained his education in America, he was always cognizant, he was always conscious on the development of women, because once we started the Civil War in 1983, women were very active in either taking care of the wounded, taking care of the children, because men were in the war, and in cases providing food and all sort of, women were very, very much involved. Though they did not partake in an active civil war fighting in the war front, they certainly helped a lot, and they contributed immensely to, and obviously women and children are most of the victims of the civil war. So in South Sudan, the government does recognize the role of women, and if you see the agreement that was signed, clearly it was spelled out 35%. One would argue that that is a small percentage, but it was put in the agreement that 35% of the government leadership was as an affirmative action will be allocated to women. And as we all know that agreement also, there was the president, and this was to accommodate all the war factions. Then you have four vice presidents, of which one of them has to be women. And the vice president, in the case of South Sudan, the first vice president, of course, being a woman, is actually the wife of the late Dr. John Garang. So you have the first vice president in this agreement, the president is Salva Kiir, the first vice president is Dr. Riek Machar, and he fought with him, and then you have three other vice presidents. So South Sudan has set the record in the world. There are 5 vice presidents, and 1 is a woman. Again, this is all leading up to this transitional arrangement. And once we have the election, they will probably go back to the census and have 1 vice president. But yes, we do have other presidents that have been women in Africa. Liberia comes to mind. I think Malawi was a temple. The president of Ethiopia also is a woman. So Ethiopia has sort of a parliamentary system. So you have the prime minister, and then the president is sort of, if you will, like Queen Elizabeth, so ceremonial. But we have in key positions, such as, in my country, the minister of foreign affairs is a woman. You have the minister of cabinet affairs, who's sort of like a prime minister of women. So clearly, there is sort of a move towards recognizing. And again, this is for the 1st century. I think Africa is also coming along, and in the case of South Sudan, these things have started out. And I'm just aware, I think about 3 weeks ago, so you start from the federal government, and we have 10 governors, and 35% applies in the 10 states. So we are apparently 10 governors, we have to send women as part of that 35% agreement. Unfortunately, we have only 1 governor, and I saw the women caucus, and again, women are just very sensitized. Everybody now becoming aware of their rights, and I saw there was which was good for me to see, they came up protesting that the governor ought to feel that 35%. And then you go to the state government also. You go to the different commissions. So there's a need, and then there's that push that, and African Union was very clear when the agreement was being signed to incorporate women's voices in the
Michael, thank you so much. Do we have any final questions before we end?
Yes, I have something that this is Dr. Reich again. Something just, I guess, to alert Chestnut Hill College students about, and also our illustrious alum, because it may be valuable in the future. Chestnut Hill College actually has a link to South Sudan through a program that the college helps to run. It's called the African Sisters Education Collaborative, or ASEC. And the point of the program is to educate African sisters so that they can help build up society in their homelands. And South Sudan is one of the 10 countries that ASEC operates in. And the Chestnut Hill College is one of 4 colleges that participate in this. And the main thrust, as I said, is to educate African sisters. But there's also a service learning project where students can sign up for a special section of the Global Studies course. And then the big project is to do a 3-week trip to one of the African countries and to pitch in and help as we can. And right now, there are 3 countries that the students go on service learning trips: Ghana, Tanzania, and Kenya. But hopefully we could open up and do a trip to South Sudan in the near future and, help pitch in with the sisters who are working in South Sudan in terms of education, healthcare, farming projects, you name it, anything that the sisters think they can do to help the country of South Sudan develop and grow. So I just wanted to mention that there is another connection, and maybe some of us will be able to meet you in South Sudan one of these days, Michael. It would be great.
Yes, absolutely.
Very cool. Thank you,
That
Jackie.
was great. For letting us know that.
Everybody, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it, and look for the link to the recording also so we can share this out. Thank you so much, Michael. It's been such a
Thank
pleasure.
you everyone, and good luck to the students. And thank you for for spending today with us. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.